Guys ready?
She don't get humidity.
No.
Okay,
On the water, it's humid.
like to call to order the study session of July 14th, 2025 at 6 p.m. Tonight, Deputy Mayor is absent, and per council rules, she did notify that she was not going to be here. Is there a motion to excuse Deputy Mayor Bowman?
I make a motion to excuse Deputy Mayor Bowman.
Okay, Councilmember Potato, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilmember Elfers. All in favor?
Hi.
Hi.
Any abstain? Passes unanimous. Which I don't know how to spell, but yeah, there we go. All right, so tonight, our first is East Pierce Fire and Rescue Annual Update. Chief Parkinson will give us the.
We're gonna see if we can get my PowerPoint working here. Some luck.
Yeah.
Hey, look, that works. Well, good evening, council. I'm John Parkinson, Fire Chief of East Pierce Fire and Rescue. Just making an annual pit stop here, separate of Public Safety Committee, just to give you an update, tell you a little bit about East Pierce, what's been going on over the last year, some stats regarding what happened in the city of Sumner in the last year, and then where we're headed throughout 25 and 26. So with that, and please interrupt me as I go along if you have any questions about anything I've covered, and then if there's anything at the end, happy to answer questions as well. So if you don't know about East Pierce Fire and Rescue, what you see on the screen is our coverage area. We cover the cities of Milton, Edgewood, Sumner, Bonnie Lake, the town of South Prairie by contract. We completely encircle Lake Tapps, all of Tahale, as well as completely encircle the towns of Wilkeson and Carbonado and go all the way up to the Mowich entrance to the the national park. A little harder to reach it now that the Fairfax Bridge is shut down, but we do cover all the way out there. So in all, that's roughly 100,000 population, 153 square miles. In 2024, we responded to over 13,000 911 calls. And since it typically takes us more than one emergency unit to handle those incidents, that means that over 30,000 emergency units were traveling down the roadways last year from East Pierce. As far as governance goes, just like the city council, we have an elected body in the form of fire commissioners. We have 7 of them. They are elected to 6-year terms, and just like you, they adopt budget and set policy for the district. Those are the folks that you see on screen. And then this fall, we have 3 of them up for re-election. As far as how we are funded, 85% of our funding comes from property taxes, and those are taxes from within the district. We do not receive money from the county or from the state. We do get some funding federally, but the biggest chunk of that being the fire levy, followed by the EMS levy, and then we have a voter-approved capital facilities bond that was passed in 2018. So all told this year, voters are paying, or homeowners are paying $2.09 per thousand of assessed valuation. As far as what our budget looks like in 2025, our operating budget is just shy of 49 million this year. It's broken down into the 5 functional areas that you see on screen, with operations or boots on the ground being the largest chunk at just over 70%. Always like to point out that over 85% of our expenses each year are wages and benefits, meaning people. We're pretty creative, but we have not found a way yet to have AI do the work or outsource it overseas. So that means it's personnel heavy, and it's all it's all people here. So how we serve the communities, as of right now, we have 198 full-time employees. As of June 30th this year, as we added our newest station at Tahale, that means we have 8 stations staffed 24/7, 365, 7 engine companies, 1 ladder truck, 5 medic units, a battalion chief, and a medical services officer, or said a different way, we have 36 personnel on duty at all times, 24/7, 365. So some stats, and so what I'm going to show you is specifically what happened within the city boundaries of the city of Sumner, understanding that the fire station in town here does respond outside of the city of Sumner, but just some stats of what happened in the city. So within the city limits, 2,388 incidents in 2024 as compared to what happened within the district. And you typically have around 15 emergency vehicles coming through the city each day responding to incidents, because as I said, it typically takes more than one emergency unit to handle any given incident. So that was just over 5,500 unit responses within the city of Sumner last year. If you take a look at kind of what the breakout was, and I'll explain what the pie chart is that you're looking at. So typically across the district and really nationwide, what we see is about 3/4 of emergency incidents to 911 as far as the fire department is concerned are medical in nature. In Sumner, you're actually on the lower end of that. If we went up to Milton, for instance, it's about 80% medical, you're getting closer to the 70% medical range. Typically, the reason probably why is just because of the heavy influence of commercial properties. So the warehouses, et cetera, are driving some more incidents rather than medical. So outside of that, like I said, medical, the biggest chunk, you'll see some of the smaller pieces are typically fire, hazardous materials calls. And then those next three categories are service call, good intent call, false call. They generally kind of roll up into the same type of concept. So that can be a false fire alarm. It can be, I think my neighbor's house is on fire and we get there and it's a barbecue smoking. So incidents like that, they're well intended. They're not malicious calls. But they end up being false in nature. So some of that we're at the mercy of how they get coded by our personnel. And so they can be close to one category or the other. So as far as what kind of the busy times throughout the day, the graph that you're looking at just shows the bell curve of what we see as far as incidents throughout a 24-hour period over the course of last year. And this is specific to City of Sumner. And that starts at midnight, ends at midnight, kind of at the other end of the graph. And effectively, this is what we see across the district is about 2/3 of our incidents happen during daytime hours when people are awake. And then overnight, things tend to calm back down. As we look by day of the week, same kind of story. For the most part, we stay relatively flat throughout the work week. Or in other words, things don't get necessarily busier from one end to the other. Each different locality or municipality has a little bit different makeup of this. Some end up being busier earlier in the week, some busier later in the week. Typically, we kind of hear from maybe policing partners that their busiest times might be on the weekends for various reasons. We tend to see our incidents busiest across the district earlier in the week, so kind of Monday, Tuesday. Basically, as people are home over the weekend, access to medical care is typically a little harder unless you're going into emergency rooms. So people oftentimes hold off getting treatment. Monday rolls around, 3/4 of our incidents are medical in nature. We start to see a big uptick in incidents typically on Monday, Tuesday across the district. As far as travel time, so this is once we are put the vehicle in gear and get rolling down the roadway to when we set the parking brake in front of the address where the emergency is. On average or 50th percentile, we're reaching all areas of the city within 5 minutes and 28 seconds, or at the 90th percentile, or what we would expect as the slowest time that we would get to an incident throughout the cities at 8 minutes and 50 seconds. That most likely is something either farther to the north of the city or potentially kind of across 410 to the south. As far as some major milestones in 2024, number one, we had multiple large recruit classes. I believe last year we actually had 3 different recruit classes go through. Pretty substantial year for capital facilities projects. Basically in the last year and a half or so, we completed our headquarters. So that's our Bonnie Lake Station. That's Fire Station 111. We just opened the Westlake Tap Station. That Station 114 opened in mid-June. And then on June 30th, Station 117, our station at Dahale, was completed and it was opened up and staffed. So a lot of work there. I'll talk about some of the other stations here in a minute. We completed our state audit of the 2023 financials, clean audit status. Broke ground on our Prairie Ridge Station 112. I'll talk about the warehouse and the training center in a minute as far as kind of where we're headed for the rest of the year. We did a substantial update to our strategic plan. We had a 5-year plan in place that ran through 2025. We actually completed that plan a year early. So we did a big update to that. And so now we've just kicked off our 2025 to 2029 strategic plan. And then last on that list, we completed 2 collective bargaining agreements for roughly 170 employees. So looking forward, so kind of for the remainder of the year and as we roll into 2026. So the image that you're seeing on screen is station 114. So that's our new station up off Westlake Taps. However, we're taking that same design and building 2 more stations with it for a couple reasons. One is the design actually works pretty well for us. But second part to that is as we recycle those plans, we save quite a bit of money for the taxpayers on architecture and engineering fees. Some of the civil work on site, that's unique to each site, but the station design itself, we can utilize a lot and eliminate a lot of expense. So that same design is currently under construction out in Prairie Ridge and that station off 120th. And then we are in pre-application process with the city of Milton to build a new fire station up in Milton. So with some luck, we'll break ground on that in early 2026. The one in Prairie Ridge should wrap up in mid-26. So the next thing, and I'll explain what you're looking at on the screen. So I mentioned earlier training center as well as logistics warehouse. So the image on the left, what you're looking at is an overhead view of our station 116, which is located at the east end of Bonnie Lake off 234th. On the lower part of the picture is Foothills Elementary, so that's in the White River School District. So we are working with the school district to acquire just over 5 acres kind of behind our fire station. We expect to have that agreement wrapped up in August, and so that will allow the district to move forward in developing a training facility. We've never had a training facility for our firefighters to train on, so we either have to rely on neighbors or just not have a facility to access. So that'll be a multi-year project to work on. So that's number 1. And then the next picture over, what you're looking at is State Route 410, again at the east end of Bonnie Lake. If you've been out on 410, you'll notice there's a roundabout out there now. So development called Peak 410, which is roughly 1 million square feet of warehouse space out there, and the green circle around that end of the building. So we've leased on a 5-year lease 20,000 square feet of warehouse space there. And that's to basically consolidate our warehouse, so all of our logistics supplies and storage, as well as our shop facility that we currently don't have. And so that gets us into that building, consolidates 2 substations into 1 central facility. It is currently in the midst of having its tenant improvements done. And so we expect to start our move in there in early August and be operational out of there by September. So basically about 45 days out from having our logistics team consolidate out of that building. And then just last piece, as always, we send out a newsletter quarterly to all of our residents, trying to share information of what's going on and any tips. We also have our website, which is full of information. If you're interested in following what's going on with us, we're very active on social media, so Facebook, Instagram, and X. As well as if you're interested in following our 911 incidents, the app on the bottom there is called Pulse Point, so you can track what's going on 24/7 with us. And that is all that I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Andy?
A couple questions. Hey, thank you very much.
Yes.
That was really thorough. I appreciate it. Can you tell me a little bit, like, how has population changed in the last few years, like 5 years or maybe? Like, I'm looking at your chart with the number of incidents. I'm trying to kind of relate it to how many people. How does that?
Yeah, so good question. And I will say it is a little difficult when we're talking population, because at the same time, the district has had mergers happen throughout that time period. So if we're rolling back 5, 10, 15, 20 years, originally Bonnie Lake, Lake Taps, added Sumner, added Edgewood, added Milton. If we're looking over the last decade or so, I believe we're looking at about 20,000 increase in population. If you look at Tahali just by itself, they're just over around 12,000 right now that weren't there roughly a decade ago. As we see that call volume start to creep up again, if we rewound around 5 years ago or so, we'd see a couple thousand less incidents per year. So I don't have hard numbers in front of me today, but that's just kind of a generalization of where we're at. As kind of what we're seeing as far as our major areas of growth right now is the Tahali area, where we're seeing a lot of the other areas be more infill instead of large planned communities.
Okay. Is there anything specific in types of incidents that have changed in the last bit?
Not necessarily. Like I said, the fire service nationwide holds up pretty normalized with the amount of medical calls at roughly 3/4. Obviously, as you can guess, over the last decade or so, we've seen an influx of opioid related incidents. We don't have a high concentration of that, but that is something that didn't used to exist if you went, kind of before 10 years ago. Not that it didn't exist, but just not as frequent as we see it now. Beyond that, it just ends up more specific to, each area, depending on what kind of infrastructure is put in. If it's residential, it's predominantly going to be medical. As we get into more commercial areas, we start to deal with a different set of problems or a different set of challenges.
Anything specific summer, like have we changed a lot as our population probably hasn't changed as dramatically as the area, but like.
Yeah, I think, realistically and quite honestly, Councilman Ranky probably knows the answer to this far better, but if you think of Sumner, 30 years ago or something, how many warehouses existed here? Where predominantly a residential area. As you start to add in the warehouses, they do bring in a different set of challenges that require a different response plan. Can require different resources, different skill sets, so potentially hazardous materials teams, ladder trucks to access roofs, things like that. So those, probably the biggest change for Sumner is just the commercial areas that may not have been there historically.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
So what do you do to help the firefighters with like incidences? Like recently there was like a child that died because of fentanyl.
Yeah.
And how do you support your firefighters or any of the
Yeah, so
people responding to
so-
that?
And great question. Thank you for asking that. So a couple things. Number one is internally, and let me back up for a second. If you looked at it historically, you'd say you'd do nothing. Probably phase 2 of that was, well, we need to turn people towards counseling. And both of those obviously weren't very effective just because you're relying on the individual to make some of those first steps. Over the last decade or so, and really for us over the last 5 years, we've developed a peer support team. So it's an internal team of just basically co-workers that then receive training on how to interact and talk with people who have been through a traumatic experience just in a kind of normal workplace setting. So if you took an incident like that, what we would typically do is take that crew out of service. We'll find somebody who's on the team who might match up well with that station or that crew. Let them go down, have a conversation. It's meant to be very informal, but it just gets at least the dialogue started. It allows them to follow up in a couple days and check in with the crew again. And then, if we realize that people need more resources, we have more resources, outside of the organization. Generally, just having that, somebody that's a peer to be able to talk to and share your experience with goes a long ways. I'm looking at Andy because we actually lean on him quite a bit as far as a resource internally for somebody who's got a lot of experience to turn to. So that's kind of the short long answer. But
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's important because you
Yeah.
want them to continue working as long as they can, but if they're really bothered by something,
Yeah.
then that's.
Yeah.
And then, recently our public safety committee went up and did a tour of the
Yes.
new station, and I think it's great that you're having all the administrative roles in one location instead of probably
It's
piecemealed
Yes,
around the.
it's nice instead of having them in about 5 different buildings, to have
Right.
everybody under one roof. Yeah.
So, it's good to see that the bonds that we passed, have really made a real big
Yeah.
impact on how the fires, so thank you.
Councilmember Kenna.
Yeah, just kind of going off of what Councilmember Elfers was talking about, and I think maybe my couple questions might be a little bit outside the bounds of an annual report, but just because we have you here,
Mhm.
I'll use your time. In terms of like development pressures, and you mentioned Tahale, that's kind of the example in the area that it's just hard for all of our infrastructure to catch up with and support. I'm just wondering about the capacity of East Pierce Fire and Rescue to to get to everything that we have. We're in the middle of wildfire season too. If something were to flare up like it did a few years back, like, can you just give me a generalization about our capacity and when we get stretched quite thin and when we feel like we've got it under control what does that look like?
So a number of different answers for you. So number one, if you just look at something as simple as staffing levels where we were 5 years ago versus where we were today. So 5 years ago, minimum staffing was 23 people on duty 24/7. Now we're at 36. So, effectively what that means is we have almost the equivalent of 4 more engine companies in service across the district. So we have more capacity just in people and emergency units. That was 6 stations back then, 7 stations now, and some additional assets on duty 24/7. So that's number one, is it's like, well, we have more resources on duty. Number two is there's a number of nationally accepted stats or metrics that we measure up against. And the two that I'll reference are unit hour utilization and reliability. And so basically, unit hour utilization is a measure of how busy a unit is, what percentage of time they're assigned to incidents in a 24-hour period. Our goal is to be less than 30% of the time assigned to an emergency incident. And then the other one is reliability, and that's the stated amount of time that someone in Sumner calls 911 and the Sumner Fire Station has a unit that's available. And it's not coming from a neighboring station. So, and the goal on that is to be greater than 80% of the time that happens. So 4 times out of 5, somebody gets their closest fire station. So, those two stats are really what we pay the most attention to. And then I showed you kind of the travel time metric. So we take those 3 things and it gives us a really good picture of how we're performing. If we start to see the time go up or there's percentages go down or up in the wrong way, then we know that we're starting to see capacity issues just on a day-to-day basis that we can't handle. When it comes to something like Sumner grade, like I said, that really goes back to a couple things. What we have on duty that day. You could take that incident and replay it today, and we can do a lot with a lot of people. What we can't do really well against is the wind. Southern California, fires back earlier this year, it was a good example of that. You can have everybody on duty, but you can't stop what the wind's going to do. So, kind of what we have more resources available to us now at this point is through DNR locally. The amount of assets that they have available to us for wildfire, for instance, with air assets, so helicopters and some handline crews that we typically have not had access to in the past, gives us a lot more capacity. So it's a long answer. Obviously, I could spend more time talking on it if you'd like. But
No, that was very
little summary on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And makes me feel, better in terms of 5-10 years ago where we were at, and we've got some more resources, got some state partnerships that, can provide resources too. I think my last question is just about, again, outside the bounds of an annual report, but just thinking about, you mentioned strategic plans. I think a lot about long-range planning and specifically natural disasters and things of that nature. And I'm wondering what you all have done recently and with that stuff, thinking, I know that there was some news about Mount Rainier recently. There's some small tremors or quakes underneath that. And, we live in a very specific part of the region that's kind of susceptible to things there. So what do you all do in terms of kind of preparedness and response with that stuff?
So when it comes to really the emergency management piece of the picture, our footprint in emergency management is not huge. And the reason being is unincorporated areas, the county is responsible for emergency management. Incorporated areas, then the cities become responsible. So we do have an assistant chief who's assigned to that function. So we spend time interacting with emergency managers from the cities. The county has a new director of emergency management that we spend time working with. The bulk of what we focus on is really more of the local emergencies, in our case, largely wildfires, flooding. And then we turn to, things like Mount Rainier, for instance. We're going to turn more towards whether that's EPIC, so the East Pierce Coalition, or whether it's under the county to attend trainings and just interact and prepare.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Great. Well, you always know where to find me. Always happy to come out. It's good to see everybody. And for those on public safety, I'll see you all tomorrow night.
Thank you, Chief.
Or the next night.
All right, resolution number 1726. Interlocal agreement with the city of Bonnie Lake for municipal court services. Jeff and Andrea, just Andrea. Hi.
Okay, so over the course of the last 7 months, we have been busy negotiating an updated interlocal agreement with the city of Bonnie Lake for our municipal court. So we're here tonight to give you a brief overview of it. Please interrupt if you have questions as I go through this presentation. Jeff is the numbers guy, so he'll be here to answer those. But we'll do our best. So a little bit of history. Bonnie Lake has been providing municipal court services to the city of Sumner since 2015. That is when we closed up shop here in Sumner. In fact, court was in this room right here. And we partnered with the city of Bonnie Lake. We found a lot of efficiencies by doing that. The city of Bonnie Lake served us with a notice of termination on December 31st of last year. We believe that that was primarily due to our increased filings and Bonnie Lake's slow decrease in filings. And so they wanted to find a more equitable balance to the fee that Sumner is to pay them.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt. When we negotiated the initial contract, the 2022 agreement at that point in time, of the total cases that were going through the court, Bonnie Lake was about 73% of them and Sumner was 27%. We go back to 2024, now it's about 50-50. So as you can see, the volume of Sumner cases has drastically increased.
Is there a reason for that?
It's really difficult to control or even project court filings. And certain cases, depending on the type of defendant or the attorney, or there's a myriad of factors, can take a very long time to work through the court system. So sometimes we have a lot of cases that are just close to being finalized and closed out, but they're taking a lot of time and those skew the numbers up.
So that was, Bonnie Lake was looking at increased costs for courts. Everything, as we know, has gone up. And then seeing that our caseload was increasing as theirs was kind of slowing down.
So Bonnie Lake, just on a high level overview, Bonnie Lake provides us a courtroom, all the judicial clerk staff, a judicial administrator, a court administrator, and then the city of Sumner brings our own prosecutor, our own public defender, and our own judge. And we'll talk a little bit about community court. That's a fairly new program, but we also bring our own community court staffing. So we're effectively Bonnie Lake's tenant, and their court staff process all of our cases. So the significant changes in this interlocal agreement are the judge. We wrapped in community court so that it's all in one agreement that covers all the bases. The term of the agreement and the termination clause changed pretty significantly, and the cost allocation. So we'll walk through each of those. Currently, the city of Sumner has its own judge, and the city of Bonnie Lake has its own judge. And there is little to no overlap. That is a fairly inefficient way to partner for municipal court services. There are a lot of cities that partner and have interlocal agreements, and they share a judge. That's so that a judge can slip in and cover a case for the other city, or so that the court clerks are getting consistent directives from the judges. Right now, we truly do have the Sumner way and the Bonnie Lake way, and that can be really complicated in terms of processing cases. So through this new contract, one of the things that was really important to both cities was that we figure out a way to publish an RFQ for a joint judge. So we have some consistency and overlap there. Community court. Community court is currently 100% grant funded. We are in our second year of the program. The numbers ebb and flow as people graduate out of the program or as they go into warrant status. But we just had 3 or 4 graduations. So the program is showing promise. I think that leaves us with about 5 participants left in the program currently. So it's not large numbers. Not every type of crime is eligible for community court. And it really depends on the participant, how long they're in the program before they graduate, or occasionally we have to revoke somebody out of the program for noncompliance. But community court is currently completely grant funded. One of the things we wanted to make sure was covered in this interlocal is that it's very clear that the cities are not obligated to continue the program if grant funding goes away. And we've seen year over year, and Jeff can speak to this a lot more than me, the reduction in our requests. So slowly the state AOC has reduced our asks each year. We're still having all of the program costs covered by grant funding, and it's still enough to get by and succeed. But if the state continues to cut that funding and it shifts to a local funding option, we need to maintain discretion to be able to close the program down. Do you want to talk at all about the grant funding?
I want to ask a quick question, and I just am not sure if I'm even correct, but I think that there was an issue with the funding. Well, not an issue, but am I correct in that the court, the judge and the staff of community court, they were being paid by the grant funds on top of their salaries? Am I correct?
In a prior iteration of the grant fund, yes. In last year's grant cycle, the judge, the prosecutor, and the public defender were receiving an additional salary on top of the city salaries, because the idea when community court started was that it was going to add a lot of additional work to their plates. And it was an unknown for us. We didn't know. So we supported the request the first grant cycle, flagged it, certainly questioned it, very concerned with supplanting, and then monitored it. And what we discovered over the course of the last 18 months or so is that it's not more work, it's different work. It's the same defendants. We're still filing a citation. They're just going through a different program than they would otherwise be in traditional court. And so this go round, we were very clear that we could not support a grant application that included additional salary for the judge, prosecutor, or the public defender.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, so the grant application that was submitted did not include any of that. We were also well aware that the state and AOC in general were going to be cutting funding. So we felt that this was the best way to keep the community court program going with just being supported solely by grant funds. And that's where we've landed, and that's what we continue to work towards.
So when you see salaries, that is our community court coordinator and our peer support counselor. We maintain two service
Yeah, and
providers.
we actually, have been leveraging outside mental health therapy. We were paying for a mental health therapist as part of the grant. That has gone away. So we kind of continue to, like Andrea said, operate the community court, but on a shoestring budget at this point in time. We barely have enough grant resources to kind of keep that going.
You have something? Go ahead.
What is AOC?
Administrative Office of the Courts.
Sorry, I should not
Sorry
use
for the-
acronyms without
She
describing
started
them.
it.
I'm sorry.
And that community court agreement went to Finance Committee and is going to be on the consent agenda for the upcoming council meeting.
The other portion of community court that's really important, this next interlocal agreement, is that we anticipate if community court continues, if the joint judge wishes to see it continue, and if we receive grant funding, that we also share a community court coordinator and a peer support counselor. Right now, we still have Bonnie Lake staffing for community court and Sumner staffing for community court. That makes it difficult for the court clerks. It's going to make it difficult for our probation officer. There's a lot of folks that interact with these community court staff that need consistency, and all the cases should be treated the same no matter if it's Bonnie Lake.
So our community court grant runs on the state's fiscal year, so it starts July 1st, runs through June 30th of next year. At this point in time, the city has only committed to our community court service providers to keep them under contract through the end of this year, through 2025. That way we can leave it up to whoever the judge is to decide if he or she wants to continue community court into 2026 or what that might look like. But as Andrea mentioned, we've kind of got it all wrapped into the agreement with Bonnie Lake. So should we go forward, we feel that we can operate in a more efficient manner than either city's doing this right now.
Should no longer be us versus them. We should really effectively blend the court system. Okay, so the term of the agreement and the termination clauses are changing somewhat drastically. The initial term on the proposed interlocal is for 3 years. The intent behind that is so that we pair it up with our biennial budgets. Bonnie Lake and Sumner have the same biennial budget cycle. And if we just did, well, if we did an initial 2-year term, which was what we were talking about and what we've historically had, it was not going to align well with the budgetary cycle. So that's the intention behind the initial 3-year term. It automatically renews unless either city terminates, which is nice. So we don't have to come back every 2 years after that and renegotiate or even give an opportunity to renegotiate. If any city wants to terminate the agreement, we extended the notice provision out to 18 months. It used to be 6 in the prior version. We found that when we got our termination notice on December 31st, we were scrambling. It did not give Sumner enough time to effectively find another alternative. And we did look, in another slide, we'll talk about all the different alternatives that we considered, but 18 months is really an appropriate term to find a new court. There's all sorts of notification provisions that we have to comply with to the state. There's financial concerns. So that's from Sumner's perspective. If we terminate, Bonnie Lake is losing out on a significant portion of their court funding. And it could lead to, and likely will lead to, a decrease in staffing. So having as much notice as possible is important to Bonnie Lake as well. Any questions about that?
Any questions? Good.
Okay, so here's where the rubber meets the road. We have renegotiated the service costs, and what that rate includes is the judge, court staff, court security, and indirect costs. That is based on Sumner being associated with 30% of the courtroom time and Bonnie Lake being associated with 70% of the courtroom time. When we first started these negotiations, we were trying to figure out how to allocate out case filings or weight the cases appropriately or figure out really the right equitable way to slice this pie. And ultimately it came down to use of the courtroom being the most appropriate because Sumner gets all of its cases done in a Thursday.
This was something that we really pushed back on. This was not how they originally envisioned this partnership working moving forward. They wanted to just go strictly off case count, which, as we mentioned, currently would be set about 50%. And as Andrea talked about, there's a lot of fluctuation in that. So this was really our sticking point in these negotiations, is we wanted it based on number of court days, which we felt was appropriate. And then also really Jason really dug into their budget and their service costs and questioned them about their expenditures and what was included and what we were really getting, making sure that, you know, our 30% of their budget was accurate court costs and they didn't have anything else in there that we felt was inappropriate.
Yeah, we stripped out just about everything that Sumner shouldn't be paying for. And then probation will be billed separately, and it's going to be billed at $600 per case. That's consistent with what we pay on a per case basis for conflict public defender services. So we had something to base that on. And probation is an as needed type of service. If somebody pleads guilty to a crime, but part of their condition of their plea is that they continue to have to come give urinalysis weekly, for example, or they have to turn in treatment reports, progress reports, or they have to check in with probation on their community service hours. You name it, probation comes in really handy for those types of cases. And so we'll pay for that on a per case basis when we need it. We didn't want to overpay if we hardly ever utilized it, or wrap it into the budget and underpay for how much we actually use. So this ultimately in 2026 leads to an increase of about $25,000 for the service fee, which is the defined term in the agreement. Probation, we estimate based on historical case numbers, will be about $18,000 a year. Miscellaneous fees, things like interpreter costs, witness fees, jury summons. Those are expensive to mail if we set something for trial. Copies, Those type of miscellaneous charges are about $6,500 a year. And then community court, like we discussed, is still fully grant funded.
So overall, with the change in services and then being billed for probation, we're looking at about $43,000 a year over our budget with this new agreement.
It's like 450,000.
That's our service fee that we'll pay. That's our 30% of Bonnie Lake's budget.
That's the total, yeah.
So we did spend an awful lot of time, in addition to negotiating with Bonnie Lake, looking into alternatives. And so these are the main three that we dove into. The first is bring court back to Sumner. This seems like a really attractive option. You have more control. People don't have to travel as far. Transportation is always a concern to get up 410. But when we say significant cost increase, we mean to the tune of nearly $500,000 to hire 3 to 3.5 FTEs, full-time employees, and retrofit this room to be a safe courtroom with exit doors on the side and having to have police staffing in here when we're operating court. It's really just not set up for court anymore. And we don't have a holding cell that's easily accessible anymore. So it
We
would
don't-
take a lot of
We don't have
retrofitting.
offices for these court people that we were to hire. There's no place to put them.
Right.
Yeah,
That
that's
conference room is the old court office.
so.
So facility challenges is probably the most daunting and expensive piece of bringing court back in-house. District Court, Pierce County District Court does partner with municipalities to process their cases. They do not offer prosecution. They historically have had the Department of Assigned Counsel available for cities to pay for defense attorney services. They told us DAC's too slammed. They won't be able to provide you with that. So we would have to bring our own prosecutor, our own public defender. They would offer judicial services. So they would offer a judge and they would process our cases. That is from the date we enter into an agreement with them forward. Anything that had been filed previously either would have to stay with Bonnie Lake or we'd have to figure out where to transfer all those legacy cases. Some of them have been at warrant status for years and they're really serious crimes that we're not willing to dismiss. Others are working their way through the process and will be really costly to leave with either Bonnie Lake or move to another court. So that was a substantial difficulty that we faced in moving to district court. And the final piece is we often house our defendants at Pierce County Jail, and they can provide for video hearings to and from the courtroom to the jail, which is nice. It's efficient and it helps cut down on transportation costs and police and CSO services. But if we house someone at any other jail, district court was not going to be as accommodating. We would have to have Kurt, our CSO, go pick them up from, say, Nisqually or Puyallup and drive them all the way to district court in Tacoma, which is a challenge. And then the final rocks that we turned over were, we reached out to the city of Fife. They operate their own municipal court. We said, do you have capacity to take us on? I think potentially in a different time, they might, but they said, no, we can't do that right now. Puyallup, same thing. Puyallup already offers court services to a number of other jurisdictions and had no room to take on Sumner's caseload. We reached out to Ording and Buckley to come up with a creative, almost regional court system where we had staff that roved from city to city and we all shared a judge, and it was, the conversations were really fruitful and all the cities were excited. But when we finally started crunching numbers, we realized that Sumner's costs would increase and the other cities would basically get the same level of service for the same cost. There was no efficiency being created by the partnership. And so it just wasn't the right time. But I think that that's a really, it's a good prospect moving forward, potentially.
Yeah, I just was curious on you mentioned the legacy cases with district court, and I was just curious if our interlocal agreement has anything in it that would help us to know what happens, because if we ever have to go a different direction, it seems like it'd be nice to have in the agreement already, like what happens to our legacy cases? Do we have a certain amount that we can have a backup plan? Is there something in there that we should think about?
Right now, the only language we've got in there is that the parties will negotiate in good faith to figure out legacy cases and an appropriate and reasonable fee to keep them. Bonnie Lake would just assume not to keep any of them. And so, at least the conversations we've had, they're open to discussing that and that the city would compensate them for it, which is a lot different than the city of Eatonville used to partner with the city of Bonnie Lake for court services as well. The city of Eatonville is now with district court, and ultimately the agreement was silent about legacy cases. And so the parties ended up in litigation and mediation over that, trying to figure out whether or not Bonnie Lake was going to be responsible for processing and maintaining all of those cases. And if so, would they be compensated for it? So the best we could do for now, because rightfully Bonnie Lake's a little gun shy about this topic, is to say that they can stay and we will negotiate the fee if and when we leave.
Any other questions?
So is the judge or even the staff, are they just hired for 3.5 days a week? Or is it a full, I mean, what is their term of office, I guess?
Time employment. Our judge is a 0.4 FTE,
Okay,
but the court staff, all of the Bonnie Lake court clerks are full-time employees. There are plenty of cases to process on days that they're not in the courtroom docketing and issuing warrants and issuing orders. They're processing cases, they're calling defendants to confirm hearings, they're taking payments over the counter. Yeah, it's a full-time job.
so what is are we paying half of that or?
Paying 30% of that.
30%, okay.
The other piece that wasn't in this presentation is that we have our own exclusive judicial chambers up there. We have space for our community court staff that Bonnie Lake give us and actually have built out for the community court program. So it's a nice setup, and Sumner is going to compensate Bonnie Lake for all the service they provide us and the space.
Okay, go ahead, Andy.
You alluded a little bit to community court and some of the challenges and decisions. Are there decisions? I know we were gonna hear from, I believe, Ms. Swain at some point, and that got canceled not that long. So are there things coming up on that community court that we have to decide on in the future, or how does that look like? Can you explain some of the dynamics there?
Yeah, the next big thing on the community court is obviously accepting the money from AOC. And that's, like I said, that's gone through finance committee and is on the consent agenda for the 21st meeting as well. But there probably will be some discussions with community court as we move forward once we've got a new judge starting in 2026. We're kind of going on the status quo model for now, at least for the next 6 months, as far as community court goes.
So the next thing is the interlocal agreement. And after that is the judge, and the judge is the same judge who does community court as the other court. Same one. So right now, Mr. Swain is doing both.
Yeah. So the cases are intermingled into the docket on Thursdays. So a community court case is given the same treatment, other than it's much less formal. It's woven into the docket on a Thursday. It's not a separate court. She doesn't necessarily gavel in and gavel out. So it's still just a Sumner case. The contracts with our service providers for community court will expire at the end of the year. That would probably be a good time, or very early in Q1, to come back to council and talk about the future of community court once we hire a judge, a joint judge, and take their pulse on whether or not they would like to continue community court. There are alternatives. It's not community court or nothing. There are programs that have historically been involved in mainstream court that can help people who are suffering from mental health or addiction that's the underlying cause of their criminal conduct. There are services that we can connect people to and a myriad of programs that are still going to be available. It's not that these folks will just end up in jail. That's absolutely not the goal. We know that doesn't work. So if community court ceases to exist, or if AOC cuts the funding, we will still make sure that these defendants are provided with what they need to stay out of the criminal justice system, to the extent we can control that.
Anybody else? No? You what?
So how does the judge selection work? Is that like, it's not an election, it's something we
It's an RFQ process.
Yeah, it'd be a recruitment, just like hiring a department director. So Bonnie Lake will open up the position and they will lead that recruitment. Someone from Sumner will sit on that panel and help select a judge. And both our current judge as well as their current judge, I believe, are both interested in the position of being a full-time judge.
So we will appoint whoever Bonnie Lake hires as their judge and we'll sit on the committee. There's language woven into this agreement that our perspective and opinions will be heavily considered.
All right. So
And
this-
that we, sorry, but as far as timeline goes, I just finished drafting the RFQ today. We'll probably publish it sometime in August or early September. Interviews will be October, early November timeframe, and then the new judge, full-time judge position would start January 1st.
Good. That was my next question, so. All right, everybody satisfied? Are we good down here? Okay, we have no executive session tonight. So I will adjourn this meeting at 6:50 PM.
Have fun at your meeting, haha.